Hello Redshifters. Redshift 2.6.10 and 2.6.11 introduces a render info print on top of your image, and you can see it here in the Redshift render view. You have, by default, you have this. Okay, so let's get this one here and let me make it bigger. So by default, that means frame is, this is the tag for frame, the tag for date, the tag for time, and the render time, right? And you get this. This is by default, but we don't want that. We want to look a bit further and see what else we can use. Well, we can use something like export time, right? So if I render this now, and by the way, this is in progressive, let's make it faster. See, it says 0.02, and I can, of course, I can do it like this, right? So export time is something, right? So you can customize this quite far. And just to show you what we can do, for instance, you can have camera, right? You can have things like let's see, render time, export time, current date, resolution, right? That's important. Okay, you can have the Redshift version, and let's add the Redshift version. Okay, and of course, tags are tags, but you can print whatever you want between them. Something like that, right? So using Redshift version 2.6.11 in this case, right? So you can have the scene name, for instance, right? So in this case, most likely it will be called untitled. Yes. Okay, and for Maya you can also use a layer. So let's say I want to use layer, right? And let's give it space. And of course it's called master layer. Okay, but Houdini and Cinema 4D can use a take system, and there's a tag called take. And for Cinema 4D, because it can have multiple render settings, it can also use the render settings. If I try to use something like take here and I'm in Maya, most likely this won't work. It just says take. It's not recognized as a tag. But this is not the most important thing. The most important things that you can have is the fact that you can actually use your own environment variables. For instance, I can put 4 environment variables here, right? So I can actually set an environment variable called show, and it will return the name of the next Avengers, okay? And then a scene, which will return S055, a shot number, which will be 1120, and as you can see here, it's between quotes, so it is actually a string. And then a user, okay? And the way this works, you can have something like this. You can have env equals user, right? Then slash, and by the way, when you're using slash, you need a bit of space between them, between tags. Then let's say env equal show, env equal scene, env equals shot. Okay, and of course you can combine this with whatever you've seen before with all the other things from here, right? So as you can see here, myself, the next Avenger, S005 on 120. But that's not all. You can push this even further. You can, for instance, query some of the 200 render options that we have for Redshift. So for instance, if you're running something like this, oops, do I have it here? No, I don't. Let's see if I can do it. Okay, for instance, if you're running this Redshift command line minus list render options from a shell, you should get the list of all the actual available options, right? So this will print out 200 of them from 0 to 199. Okay, so for instance, I could get the min and max samples. You see here, unified min samples, unified max samples. So I can do something like this: rs option equals unified min samples, rs option equals unified max samples, and of course you can look for the adaptive error threshold as well, but this will give you 4 and 60, and you can pretty much try to figure out which each of these one does. Not all are useful or are as nice as these ones. For instance, you can have the primary GI engine, right? See here, primary GI engine. So let me copy that and paste it in here. And this will work, of course, but it will just return GI engine none. See, you would expect to have, if you're, for instance, you were setting this to brute force. Let's say brute force, and you're actually doing all this. And let me just copy this, copy paste. And instead of primary, use secondary. Right, if I re-render this, I'm gonna have this whole string: RSGI engine brute force, RSGI engine brute force, right? Well, of course, you would have preferred to have something like this, right? BF. That's just nice. But look, all these are really, really handy. So I invite you to have a look at them. Now, there's one thing I would like to point out. If you want to use these tags, actually, to use these RS options in the tags, what you have to do is really run this Redshift command line minus list render options. And the reason for this is the following. Maya, for instance, internally uses a different name, right? So if I go here and I look the attribute, I can see that this is called primary GI engine, right? And if you're looking at this, let's see, where was that primary GI engine? See, primary GI engine. Now, let me just drag this here. Okay, this is the my attribute, and it's with the lowercase because Maya uses camel casing. Okay, and if you're looking at this as the printout of the Redshift command line minus list render option, you have this a bit different, right? So real attribute name is this, right? And this is fine. I mean, for Maya it's quite simple, but if you're going to Cinema 4D, and Cinema 4D has this as well, right? And if you're going for this to actually set these values here, well, and you're going to try to figure out the name of the variables in here, and let me just open the console, right? And let's say I want to get the numbers of passes, right? And I drag this here, and you have this bit, right? And let me just go back to Maya. And in Maya, for instance, in Cinema 4D, you get all this. Okay? So what you want to do is, well, you can't use this. You have to know the actual name of this, which is the, let's see, well, let's see, progressive number of passes. This is the guy. Okay, sorry, RS option. Otherwise it's just interpreted as text, and you can see here it's 1024, right? So as you can see, each DCC uses a different internal parameter name, but the parameter that you have to use here, it's actually the same for all the DCCs. So for instance, instead of all this, I'm gonna just Control V this, and I expect to have here, well, RS option equals 1024. Okay, so because each DCC uses a different parameter naming and naming convention, you really need to use that Redshift command line minus list rest or other options to get the actual names that are used inside the engine. I hope this is useful for you, and if you have any questions, just ask them on the forum. We're there to help you. Happy Redshifting, guys. Cheers.